name's Kale Warnock, and I'm the author of all of the world's finest books.
True.
That was supposed to be hyperbole. My first book is called The Forgotten Skills of Self-Sufficiency, used by the Mormon pioneers. And, oh dear, I don't have my second book here. I may have sold it. Anyway, I don't have my second book. My second book is called The Art of Baking with Natural Yeast. And my third book is called Backyard Winter Gardening in All Climates Without Any Artificial Heat or Electricity. My fourth book is Troubles on the Menu, which is a very funny novel. And my new book is More Forgotten Skills. And then I just finished a backyard herbal health and healing book.
Oh, yeah.
And that'll be coming out eventually some point. I just barely turned in the manuscript and published it. So thank you for coming here today. I'm hoping to be helpful to you in getting you gardening in Utah. But first, before I start, let's talk about why we care about gardening. Does anybody want to talk about why we care about gardening? That's right. Does anybody recognize this? How many of you have heard this speech before? If you've heard this speech before, there'll be no cheating.
I read it in the book.
There'll be no cheating if you've heard this speech before, okay? What is this, non-cheaters?
I actually have heard a speech before. I know what it is.
Okay, what is it?
There are 4 ration cards.
That's correct. This is a World War II ration book number 1. This is not a replica, this is an original. And this is important to me because this still has 3 of the original stamps in it from 1943. In 1943, what could you get for these 3 stamps? No? Couldn't even come close to getting sugar for 3 stamps. Potatoes? No, not for 3 stamps. You could not get potatoes.
Salt?
Were these stamps any good in 1943? Anyone?
Did you get salt?
No, you couldn't get salt.
Seeds?
You could get a can of peas or a can of beans in 1943 at the grocery store for these 3 stamps. That's what you could get. Why were we using these in 1943? Yes?
We were using them because all of the metal was going to take care of the troops. And so the food was either going to the troops or going to the people. It couldn't feed both.
That's correct. She's cheating because she's read the book.
No.
That's true. In 1943, we had exactly enough food to either feed the people at home or feed the troops that we had sent overseas. Because when you run over to talk to Hitler, will you be Hitler in this instance? I'll be America and you be Hitler.
No.
And I come knock on your door and say, "Excuse me, Hitler, I've brought all these people to fight you to the death. If you'll just lead me to your nearest Costco, we'd like to stock up on some reserves and then we'll be right back."
Yeah, let me lock you in and turn on some gas while you're in there.
That's not how it works in war. We had sent millions of people overseas to fight the war, and we had to send food to feed them 3 meals a day, every day. We had enough, and then we had almost no, the workforce was overseas. So we had enough food to feed the troops, or we had enough food to feed the people at home. We did not have enough to do both. And so we instituted what was then an old idea. It was called victory gardening. Has anybody ever heard of victory gardening in this room? Victory gardening is what saved us in World War II. If we had not had victory gardens, and the War Department in 1945 issued a report that said that in 1943, 1944, and 1945 we had grown enough food, and in victory gardening we transformed playgrounds, vacant lots, home gardens, flower beds. It was all transferred into growing vegetables, and we had grown as much food in these little victory gardens as we had grown in all of the farms in America. And we had just had enough to feed the people and the troops, and that's how we were able to win the war. As I said, this was an old idea because we had to do this in World War I, and this is not a replica, this is an original World War I victory gardening guide called the War Gardening Guide. And as you know, this says Victory Edition 1919. In 1919, as you know, we were in the middle of a horrible World War I. Is that right? We were right smack in the middle of a horrible war in 1919. Right?
No,
No, it's wrong.
it was over.
Does anyone here want to avoid repeating history, or maybe you're not interested in that? What were we doing in 1919? The war ended in the fall of 1918, so why were we issuing a 1919 war gardening guide? And then we issued one in 1920, and then we issued one in 1921, and then we issued one in 1922, and the war had ended in 1918, so why were we doing that?
Probably to replenish.
No. Any other guesses? Look, there's my grandson holding an apple out of my grandson. He's usually here with me. Look, here's when I used to be fat and miserable on the day I graduated from BYU. I'm getting distracted by my own book.
Was it because all the plant, no, because production didn't even start until later, right?
It's because by the end of World War I, what happens in war is that things are disrupted. Things are disrupted. And here's an important and a key fact, which is one of the facts that sort of keeps me up at night, is that there's not enough, and I want you to listen to this very carefully, there's not enough vegetable seed in the United States to feed the state of Utah should the zombie apocalypse happen. Think about that for a moment. There's not enough vegetable seed in the United States to feed the state of Utah should the zombie apocalypse happen. World War I was the zombie apocalypse. And in 1919 and 1920 through 24, we had millions of people all over Europe who were starving to death. One of the most difficult photos that I have ever seen was taken by the Friedhof Nansen Party in 1921 in a rural village in Russia. And this is the photo, this is my new book, if you've seen my new book. I get emotional when I even look at this photo. I didn't dare put the photos of the children in. They took hundreds of photos. The Friedhof Nansen was assigned by the United States to help lead a huge delegation to deliver food from the war gardens in the United States to feed these people who were literally starving in Europe because there was no seed. Because the only way that you can have seed is to grow seed. There's no miracle way to get vegetable seed. The only way to have vegetable seed is to grow vegetable seed. And the war had ravaged all of Europe, and there was almost no seed to be had. Friedhof Nansen arrived, and he spent years traveling trying to save these people from starving to death. And he arrived in this little village in 1921. And I know you can't see this photo very well, but they had been without food for so long in this village that they had eaten the thatched roof. That's what this photo is. It's where the people had been taking the thatch off of the roof to eat because that was the only thing that they had left. I mention all this to you because we have been here before. We have been here in 1919 through 1924, where people were literally dying of starvation. We've been here in World War II in 1943 when we had to do our rationing. We've been warned. We've been through this before. And what concerns me is that we are the people in the history of the world who know the least about how to feed ourselves.
Can I ask one question?
No, you cannot. Shh, be quiet. I want you to think about that for a moment. We here in this room are the people in the history of the world who know the least about how to feed themselves. Now, let me give you the first tip for successful gardening in Utah. Here's the first tip. Plant something. Plant something. That's the first successful tip for gardening in Utah. If you don't grow anything, then you can't eat anything. Here's what bothers me about gardening in 2014. We have turned gardening into a hobby. What is the definition of a hobby? Anyone here have any hobbies? Anyone in here speak English?
I think people think they should
I'm the
enjoy
kind
it.
of person that the less you talk to me as an audience, the more I yell and get angry. So if you want to keep me calm, you have to talk back to me.
I think people think they should enjoy it. They're like, oh, do you enjoy it? I go, weeding? Are you kidding me?
I enjoy reading, but I'm weird. Yes?
So you do it as a pastime as opposed to a livelihood?
Yeah.
Okay, almost. We're getting closer. Here's the definition of a hobby. You pay. That's the definition of a hobby. You pay. Now let's talk about a Martha Stewart garden. I think I sort of hold Martha Stewart personally responsible for this, because Martha Stewart went on television and showed everyone her gorgeous gardens. She failed to show them the 100 people that she paid to make them gorgeous. I shouldn't be mean to Martha Stewart. I'm sure she's a lovely person. The goal in gardening is that the garden pays us, we don't pay the garden. And more people give up gardening because they think, there was a famous article several years ago in the New York Times called The $64 Tomato, in which this man had never gardened before, did everything that he was supposed to do, and then wrote an article about it, and he figured out that one tomato cost him $64. That's the Martha Stewart method of gardening. And that is not sustainable, nor is it useful, nor is it helpful, and that will be the first reason why you'll give up gardening, is because you can't afford it anymore. So let's think about how people fed themselves. Yes, all the righteous are gathered up here. This is the gathering of the righteous, so if you're looking for the righteous, come up here. Satan is downstairs.
Doing yoga?
The kids are doing yoga downstairs, Kale.
Did you know that Monsanto is French for my Satan? Oh, come on.
I believe it. I believe it.
That's a damn good joke. I expect more laughter for that.
I thought it was true. I didn't think it was a joke.
You people are too uptight. You're too uptight. So the garden has to pay us. We don't pay the garden. And there's a lot of people out there who are willing to tell you how you can pay your garden. Just start at the top of the shelf and go all the way through the hardware store and buy everything in there that they have to sell you, and then your garden will be a success. That's a crazy way. That's a hobby garden. We don't believe in that. We believe in trying to feed ourselves self-reliantly and self-sufficiency. In Utah, we have a climate that is basically the equivalent of Hawaii, right?
I wish.
So the people who are not raising their hands have never been to Hawaii, so they think that's true. And the people that have been to Hawaii are like, what the hell are you talking about? Sorry, I have a small swearing problem. I'm so sorry. Don't swear. I only say words that are in the Bible, though. What were we talking about?
Climate of Hawaii.
Oh, climate of Hawaii. So in Utah, we have a couple of things going against us when it comes to gardening. Number one is that we have something that I like to call Utah's porcelain soil. Utah's porcelain soil is better for making porcelain dinner plates, than it is for making dinner. We have terrible soil in many places, especially along the Wasatch Front. So we use raised bed gardening instead. And raised bed gardening has been used for more than 1,000 years, and it allows you to control what soil you're putting in top. And when you think about raised bed gardening, you think about going to the hardware store to buy some soil. But when I think about raised bed gardening, I think about getting all of the organic material in my yard and making my own free raised beds. And how many of you have been to my gardens? So you know, because you've seen. And I paid nothing for any of that. It was all for free. I got the wood for free off of Free Cycle because I'm cheap. Because the garden should be paying me, I shouldn't be paying the garden, right? So we have terrible soil. It's especially terrible for seed starting. And you can dump all of the improvements, at least where I live in Alpine, you can dump all of the improvements in it that you want for the rest of your life, but you'll never get rid of all those rocks. And you can't go 2 feet without rocks. And I had brand new neighbors move in next to me, and they came over to my house, and this woman, she brought her 10-year-old and her 12-year-old son, and she was all excited, and she said, I've got these, we've bought this land, we've got an acre, and now I'm going to have these kids dig all of these garden places. And I said, oh, how many pickaxes do you have? She said, oh no, I bought them a shovel. And I said, well, you can have your kids out there digging all summer long with the shovel, and the shovel will just break and you'll never get anywhere. You need a pickaxe because we have no good soil, it's just plain rocks. So we have to be able to control our seed starting medium, and that's why we use raised bed gardening. And then the other important thing, well, 2 other important things, is that we have to be using the correct seed for gardening in Utah, and we have to be watering correctly. Somebody keep me on track here, I'm getting off track. In Utah, how often do we water our garden in Utah? Our issue is that we have extremely low humidity. In the summer, we have extremely low humidity. And when you have low humidity, what does that do to your garden? It just sucks the air. The air sucks moisture out of the ground. That's why we have Utah's porcelain soil. God invented this thing called Utah's porcelain soil. That's the technical name of it. Because the one thing that our porcelain soil does do very well is hold water in July and August, June, July, and August. So when we do our raised bed gardens, we just put a little layer on top of them because the roots have to go into the clay soil, because the clay soil is where the water is going to hold. So I come back to the question of how often do we water our garden in Utah? Anyone here speak English?
When needed.
Have any gardening experience?
When needed.
Well, how often? How often do you have a garden?
Well, my different plants need different water.
No, they don't. That's the wrong answer. The answer is every 10 days. The answer is every 10 days.
To get the roots deeper.
We water every 10 days.
Did you say a light water?
And I want you all to think about that for a moment because that's not what y'all doing.
What about when you're starting new plants?
Y'all not watering every 10 days.
That's right.
Y'all not watering every 10 days. So, we live in a desert, we can't waste any water, and your garden's going to be much healthier if you water every 10 days. The way that you do that is you water overnight every 10 days. I use an overhead oscillating sprinkler that came from Ace Hardware that cost $10, and 2 weeks ago I was giving this speech in Pleasant Grove, and the owner of Ace Hardware was sitting in the audience, and he got all excited because I said, Ace Hardware. It's true, though. It's a $10 oscillating sprinkler, and it goes like this. And it goes all night, and it waters the entire garden. And so again, we're trying to get the garden to pay us. We're not going to buy those ridiculous drip lines, because those ridiculous drip lines are famous for doing one thing, which is what? Clogging. Stupid things. All they do is clog, 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 clog. And they will want to make you give up gardening, because then your plants will die. So you need a $10 oscillating sprinkler, water overnight, every night. Now somebody said, what about your seeds? And that's a very good question. So here's the formula for when you're planting your seeds. First of all, many of our seeds, and we'll go through these, many of our seeds we will plant as soon as the ground breaks in spring, so in February, just as soon as the ground can be worked. And then the rest of the seeds we will probably plant on May 15th. This year, you know, you try to press that forward as far as you can get it, but we're going to have another freeze in a couple of days. So this year it's probably going to be May 15th for real, that we are going to be frost-free. You have to keep an eye on the weather patterns. So we plant our seeds and we water them immediately. And then we skip a day and then we water. And then we skip 2 days and then we water. And then we skip 3 days and then we water all the way until 10 days. That's what we do with our seeds. Any questions about that?
Say
Yes.
that one more
Same
time.
with starting plants?
Pardon?
Same thing with like starts that you're putting in?
Yes, same thing with transplants too.
Say it again, please.
You plant your seeds or your transplants and then you water immediately. Then you skip a day and then you water, and then you skip 2 days and then you water. It's a little math thing. Plant, water, skip 2, water, skip 3, water, skip 4, water, skip 5, until you're skipping 10 days at a time. Now, when you get to skipping 10 days at a time, it's going to be at least June or July, and you're going to be cursing my name. I'm going to say that down, Caleb, my garden. Oh, I do this when I speak in churches too. It's a very bad habit. I apologize. Well, I don't apologize. So here's the issue, is that we have this thing called panting pepo, because you're going to have your garden and it's going to look like your plants are dying, and then you're going to get mad at me, and you're going to be cussing me out, and you're going to say, that Caleb, he said to water every 10 days, he had no idea what he was talking about, he's a nut. And that's because we have something called planting pepo. There are 4 different kinds, there are 4 different groupings of squashes. And among the pepos is the most prevalent. Things like all of your summer squashes and your Halloween pumpkins, Connecticut field pumpkins, they do exactly what dogs do in the heat, which is this. That's what they do. So when it's hot and you have a pepo species, all of the leaves go like this. And they look just like that. And then you panic. And you start throwing water in the garden. And no matter how much water you throw in the garden, guess what's going to happen? your peppos are going to still look like that. And then you're going to be like, now they're dead. It's all his fault. But planting peppos are just perspirating. They're just taking in the heat and letting it back out. And there's an easy way to tell the difference between a panting peppo and a truly dying vegetable garden. Here's the test. You go out right at dusk, and the panting peppo will be like this. They'll be happy. They'll be out again. And they'll be the same thing first thing in the morning. They'll be like this. They'll be, and the sun will come out. They'll go, oh, I don't want to be in the sun. But if you go out right as it gets dark and your squash plants are still like this, that means they're dying and they need water. So then you should water them. But if you go out right at dusk and they're all happy again, it's just go, oh, Caleb was right. It's that panting peppo. I'm not going to panic even though I have all these swaths of my garden that look at midday like they're really dying. They're not.
If you're just doing little containers, is that the same watering system?
So let's talk about container gardening in Utah really fast. Container gardening in Utah is the world's worst idea. Why? And I was just at Cook's greenhouse yesterday to buy some aqua plants for my wife for Mother's Day to put in our pond. And I love going in Cook's greenhouse because it's the one place in Utah where there is humidity. So if you have really dry skin, I suggest you just go to Cook's greenhouse and visit for a few minutes and your whole body goes, you gain like 2 pounds of water weight just walking in the door. The problem is, and they have gorgeous baskets of flowers that you can spend a lot of money on. And then you take them out, and a week later, I all of a sudden lost my abilities. A week later, what do they look like a week later? They look like those planting peppos, except they're really dying. They look like this. That's because we have no humidity in our air, and when you have something growing in the ground, the only way that the air can suck the moisture is from the ground surface. When you put something in a pot, then the air can suck the moisture from the ground surface and all the way around the plant and the bottom of the plant. So we cannot keep those containers watered. The only way to water them in Utah is to just drench them in water. And that's a terrible waste of water. So how do we container garden in Utah? We get containers with no holes. Use containers with no holes. That's also how we do hugelkultur in Utah, but that's another day. We won't talk about that tonight. You need containers with no holes. If you have containers with holes, then go to DI and get yourself those bathtub things. What are those?
Stoppers.
Those plastic, they're like round plastic circles, that's all they are. Just put that in the bottom of the pot and then fill it up and it won't let any of the water out. Just like a bathtub stopper. And that's how we container garden in Utah, because we need to keep every drop of moisture inside the container that we possibly can. That's what our porcelain soil does. Yes?
Is that true for indoor, like herb plants?
It depends on you, but it helps mine. Because I get very busy and I forget to water. Yeah.
So, would you put rocks on top of that plastic thing so the water pulls off a little bit to the bottom, or not?
Well, it depends on how deep your container is.
Okay.
The larger container you have, the less often you will have to water it. And then I put whatever free thing, the bottom half I fill with whatever free thing I can get. So you can put in your cardboard egg cartons can go into the bottom. Your white office paper can go into the bottom. You can put the sticks and branches from your yard into the bottom. Just pack it in with whatever free organic thing you can get. But don't put anything with chemicals on it. Ink is vegetable-based by law in the United States so long as it does not have a sheen on it. So if you have paper that is kind of shiny, that's a chemical that you don't want in your soil or in your vegetables. So that's what we're not going to put in. Yes?
Now, how deep do you make your grow boxes? Because you were saying as long as you
My
don't
grow
make
boxes
them.
are this tall. Have you been to my garden? No, you
I've
haven't?
been there, but I can't remember.
What's wrong with you? The whole state of
I
Utah
know.
has been to my garden.
I've been there. I can't remember. It was a long time ago.
I use 2x4s, and so my grow boxes are this deep because, again, all I'm trying to do is control the weeds and get a good seed starting seed starting soil on the top, but the roots need to go into the clay soil because that's where the water is. If you go buy the fake soil from the hardware store, then your water's just going to go right through it, and you're just going to have to put more and more and more water in your, even if you use those stupid drip systems, then they're just going to have to use more water to keep that from dying. That's not how we garden in Utah. Yeah. Yes?
I have layers, about 6 inches of wood chips on everything, and I don't have to water as much.
Good, that's because you have a mulch.
Yeah, it's really heavy.
Yes, that,
Lots of work.
but you paid for that. So remember, don't pay your garden, make it pay you. Make your garden pay you. But if it's working for you, then do it. I'm not here to discourage you, to stop you from doing something that's working for you. If it's working, then I want you to do it. And then I want you to do it with your children and your grandchildren, most especially, most importantly. Because I don't really care about you people. This is my speech I call I Don't Care. This is a really short version of my speech called I Don't Care About You. The reason I don't care about you is because you're adults. You can go make your own decisions and you can live with the consequences. There's this thing in the world called natural consequences, and no matter what you do, you cannot escape from them. And our whole goal in teaching children is just that one concept. That's all we have to teach our children, and they'll thrive in the world. You cannot escape natural consequences, whether they be good or whether they be bad. Prosperity always comes in abundance. It never comes in famine. It always comes in abundance. So we simply need to teach our children about prosperity and abundance and how to avoid the bad natural consequences, and all will be well. One of the things that we don't do very well in Utah is plant the correct seeds. And I had a gentleman who, I shouldn't tell this story because I'm going to get in trouble for telling this story, but I keep telling it all over the States, so I might as well tell it to you. There was a gentleman who lived in Provo, and he was, I think he was 28 years old, and he sold a software company, and he had more money than he knew what to do with. So he took off for a year and went around Europe and just lived in Europe and bummed around and spent lots of money. And then he came back and he decided he had an epiphany, because now he had nothing to do with his life, because he had built up this software company from scratch. He was 28 years old. He had tons of money. He had sold it. He had nothing to do all day. So after spending a year in Europe, he came back and he decided that he was going to open a CSA. Do you know what a CSA is? A CSA is Community Supported Agriculture, and that's where you buy a subscription to a weekly vegetable delivery. So he spent a scary amount of money to build himself a CSA. Got some land up clear up at the top of the mountain over in Orem, and up above the cemetery. And then he built these really nice greenhouses, and then he signed all these people up for the vegetable subscription service. And then the day came when he was supposed to start delivering vegetables, and guess what? There was nothing to be delivered. And so he panicked, and he found out about me, and he called me and paid me as a consultant, and I came in as a consultant to help him. And the first thing I said was, I sure wish before you spent $100,000 on these greenhouses, you would have called me before then, because I could have saved you $85,000. But you've already done that, so that's too late. So we're walking through. He has these greenhouses, and this was early in the spring. He had these greenhouses, and they had these 6-foot-tall tomato plants in them, and they were gorgeous tomato plants, and they had no tomatoes on them. And I said, and I want you to pay attention to this carefully, I said, what day count are these? And he said, what's a day count? $250,000 into the project, he said to me, what's a day count? Day count is the most important thing, the most important single thing that you can know in gardening. And so I said, what variety of tomatoes are these? And he said, I don't know. And he and I are walking through this garden, and he has these people that he's paying by the hour, and they're following us around. And I said, chop, get one of these people. Go get me the seed packet. So he sends his people running off, and they come back with the seeds that they had planted. And of course, they were hybrid tomatoes, which I don't believe in at all. And then they were 240-day count tomatoes. Do you know where 240-day count tomatoes grow? Hawaii and Florida, that's correct. Let's say you had $1 million and you spent it on 1 million seeds of 240-day count tomatoes. How many tomatoes would you get out of it in Utah? It doesn't matter how much money you throw at 240-day count tomatoes in Utah, you ain't going to get a tomato out of it. And he had thrown $250,000 into this project, and he didn't even know what a day count was. And when I discovered he didn't even know what a day count was, I politely said, gardening experience do you have? And he said,
0.
I've never grown a garden before. Spent $250,000 because he was here to save Utah Valley through his CSA. Now, his CSA is doing much better, and I appreciate his CSA, and I support his CSA, and I don't tell this story to belittle him or the CSA, especially because I keep telling this story all around this valley, and probably half of you know him. I do tell this story, however, because we have to be smarter. When I started this little tirade of mine here today, one of the first things I said to you was, we in this room are the people in the world who know the least in history about how to feed ourselves. That's a grand example of that principle. So, what I have done for years and years and years, and I didn't start doing this as a commercial venture, I started doing this because I've always wanted to be self-reliant. And I grew up in a town of 98 people, and in a town of 98 people, when you got hungry, you just ran over to the Walmart, and then they had the McDonald's on the inside, right? So we just ate McDonald's all day long. Oompa loompa. There's no Walmart in a town of 98 people, so when we got hungry in a town of 98 people, where did we go?
Cellar.
To the cellar, to the pantry, to the garden, to the cans, to the bottles, yes, to the freezer where we could put up our own food. And I didn't know how horrible grocery store food tasted until I went to college. I went to BYU, which is also the first time I'd ever had a shower. It's true. Never had a shower until I went to BYU. I'd never seen cable TV until I went to BYU. And then I had never really purchased my own food before I went to BYU. And so I had worked really hard on the farm, and I had saved up this money, and I marched into the grocery store. It was it Reams in Orem? It was supposed to be super cheap. So I went in there with my hard-earned, saved money to buy some strawberries, because I had started growing strawberries when I was 8 years old. My grandfather had given me strawberry plants as a gift when I was 8 years old, and I had grown my own strawberries ever since. And when you grow your own strawberries, they're like this size, right? Right? Do you people speak any English in here?
Yes, right.
You grow your own strawberries, and they're like this size. So I walk into the Reams, or whatever it was, the Food for Less, and the strawberries are the size of softballs. And I was like, holy moly Lido, I've been doing this wrong this whole time. I was literally stunned. They're the size of softballs. So I buy some and they're hugely expensive too. I buy some with my hard-earned money, and I take them back to my cheapo, moldy college apartment, and I bite into one, and what does it taste like? A softball. It tastes like a softball. It looks like a softball. I couldn't believe that people were paying cash for that. It's so disgusting. And then I discovered that in order to get children to eat vegetables today, this is my new favorite theme. In order to get children to eat vegetables today, what do you have to do? You have to get a celebrity to write a book about how to hide the vegetables from your children. I didn't know this, but this has become a trend. And I went to give a speech recently, and they had these little books lined up that were written by these celebrities, and it was all about how to blend up all your vegetables and hide them in the food so that the children will never know. I didn't know this was an issue, because at our house where we live, we have fresh food 365 days a year, and the children are like the lawnmower. They just go down have you ever seen the video of the bears in Alaska during spawning season of the kokanee salmon? Have you ever seen those videos? Do you know what the bears do because when the fish are swimming upriver, and there's more fish than the bears know what to do with. So what do? They bite the head off, because that's where the most oil is, and they throw the rest of the fish aside. That's what the children in our house do at the height of tomato season. They go down the tomato plants, they take one big bite of the tomato, and chuck it. Chuck it. And I follow along behind them going, stop wasting all my tomatoes! And the green beans, they just pick the green beans, eat them as fast as they can. And at our house, it's a race. When raspberries are in season, you have to see who can get up earliest in the morning, because you know you're having raspberries for breakfast, that's all you're having. You get up from bed, you go outside, and you pick your breakfast right off the bush. And whoever gets there first gets the most raspberries that day. That's how it goes. I didn't know that you needed a celebrity to write you a book about how to hide your vegetables from your children so that they would actually eat them. That's where we're at in 2014. Anyway, I think I got off on a tangent. Yes?
The days
Oh yes, the days to harvest.
Isn't there like I'm so confused by that because I think there's,
I
at
could,
least online, two schools of thought on
no,
that.
there's only one school of thought. There's my school and everyone else's. And
Right.
mine is correct and everyone else's is correct. So here's how you do a day count, because day count can be confusing. Day count is from the day that the plant is of transplantable size, whether or not you're going to ever transplant it. The first day starts when the plant is at transplantable size until it produces its first fruit. Okay? So thank you for getting me back on track, because I do like to yell at celebrities.
So what if it's a seed?
Seed has nothing to do with it. So you don't start your day count until the plant is of transplantable size. Yeah. So a 240 day count tomato in Utah is going to be more along the lines of 300 days from the time you plant the seed. Do you understand that? Yeah.
That's a good question. How much time do you add on to a seed count or to a day count when you're looking at seeds? I don't know. I guess what I'm asking.
Yeah, 60 or 90 days. I would suggest that, well, it depends on what you have. So what I have here, what I've done for years and years and years, is that there's two options. You can do the 240 day count option, or you can do the 40 day count option. Okay? For tomatoes, I'm talking about tomatoes. We can do the 240 day count option or the 40 day count option. And our goal in having a garden that pays us, instead of a garden that we pay, is if you have a garden that is, you're just waiting for the day count, then you're just looking at the garden while it grows weeds, right? We want to shorten that window as much as possible so that we can eat, because the lower the day count, the more you're going to be able to harvest from those plants. Does that make sense to you? So for years and years and years, I have been testing to find out what seeds have the lowest day count in Utah that grow in absolutely organic garden, because my garden is 100% organic with no inputs whatsoever. I don't believe in hybrid seeds for reasons that you can read about in my first book, because Monsanto is a French Satan and we don't want him. He can go away.
Are you offering tours of your garden?
I give tours after my classes. I try to teach a class once a month, and then I give tours after my classes.
And that's on your blog?
Well,
Is
yes.
that your schedule?
If you go to my blog, kalewarnock.blogspot.com, then you can sign up for my emails.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it got to the point where people were just showing up every day without appointments, and so I said, nope, we're not doing that. So I'm going to take you through this really quickly and tell you what these are and why they're the best for Utah. Is that a good idea?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll start over here. This is America spinach. America spinach is hard to find. This is the best spinach for two reasons. Number one, it's the best self-seeding spinach in the world. And number two, it's the most winter hardy spinach in the world. And I really enjoy self-seeding gardening, because the less I have to do in the garden, the happier I am, the better off I am. I love perennial vegetables. I love self-seeding vegetables because they're perennial for all intents and purposes. So because I have a very, very busy life and I have an enormous garden. So I like my garden to do most of the work. This is my wife's concept. She calls this thriving on benign neglect. And she didn't tell me that until after we were married. This is a true story, before we were married, she'd invite me over every Sunday for Sunday dinner, and we'd have Sunday dinner. And I thought that's how we lived. You know, I thought that's how she lived. And then I got married to her, and she said to me, oh, by the way, the philosophy of my life is benign neglect. The animals, the children, the garden, the yard, they all have to thrive on benign neglect. And what I didn't realize at the time that meant is that she doesn't cook.
What about rotation?
She's not a cook, and I'm not very smart. I'm a slow person, because we'd have the same damn thing every Sunday for Sunday dinner. And she only knows like 2 recipes. I didn't catch on. I thought she was a cook. Anyway.
Crop rotation, you said self-seeding.
Self-seeding rotates itself. I should preface that by saying I practice no-till gardening.
Right.
We don't till our gardens. Tilling is terrible for gardening, so I practice no-till gardening. Self-seeding vegetables rotate themselves. They move 4 to 6 feet a year by themselves. Yeah, it turns out, let's all wait for this. Wait for it. Mother Nature knows what she's doing. She doesn't need you, and she doesn't need me. Mother Nature will, no, don't look so dumbfounded. I promise you it's true. Mother Nature will help you. I'm sorry, what?
Put your gardening in grow boxes.
Oh, yes. I'm gardening in grow boxes, yes.
So explain that.
And so when you go to my garden, you'll see that there are things growing in the pathways. That's because when my self-seeding vegetables self-seed themselves, I let them be.
Yeah, it's working with the flow.
It's working with the flow. Now, I could spend my life being very anal retentive about that, right? I could spend my life going, oh, my spinach have seeded themselves into my pathway of my garden. What would Martha Stewart think? Instead, I go out and go, oh, look, free spinach. So that's why I like it. We've got to go do this faster because we've only done one. What time is it?
It's about 12 after.
Okay. Because I also wanted to take you guys for an herb walk outside because we should have, anyway. We'll pick my favorite. My favorites are all at seedrenaissance.com. This is a carrot color mix. I'm happier when I have color in my life. I don't know about you, but maybe you like just white and gray. But I like color. And the more colors that you eat, the healthier you're going to be. This is a color mix of yellow carrots, red carrots, purple carrots, white carrots, and there are even some orange carrots. That's my favorite, and I've planted that every year for years and years and years, and all of this is available here.
And all the carrots grow well? Because I bought a mix elsewhere and didn't have luck with all the different colors.
Yeah, but this is by me for you. I don't sell stuff unless it grows fantastically. I have grown more varieties of carrots than anybody else in Utah, probably. I've grown every cantaloupe known to man. I have grown every watermelon known to man. I'm not kidding. I spent thousands and thousands of dollars doing these tests. I am the first member of Seed Savers Exchange to be a lifetime member in Utah. I have access to tens of thousands of seed varieties that you don't have access to. I test everything. I spend huge amounts of money and time buying every seed I can get my hands on. Because these, if you read in my first book, you will know that, and this is important to know, the vegetable varieties that were available in the United States in 1904, 93% of them are now extinct. Did you hear that? 93% of them are now extinct. Seed Savers Exchange is a group of people who are working tooth and nail night and day to keep the rest of them from going extinct. And why are they going extinct? Because in the 1920s, Monsanto had this crazy idea. And the crazy idea was, for 6,000 years, people have had free vegetable seeds. We should stop that. Monsanto is a $1 trillion company. Monsanto owns more than 50 other what's the word I'm looking for? Stock exchange. Anyway, don't get me started on Monsanto. They're a huge company. They own a lot of huge companies. In the 1920s, they had this brilliant idea. They said, listen, people have gotten seed for free for 6,000 years. If we can disrupt that, we can make huge amounts of money. And that's what they did. And they created this thing called the hybrid vegetable, which the parentage of a hybrid vegetable is an open pollinated, what you call an heirloom vegetable. And they keep the parentage a secret and use artificial pollination techniques that you cannot do at home to create vegetable varieties which are self-suiciding. Ta-da! A self-suiciding vegetable. Isn't that what the world needed, was a self-suiciding vegetable variety? So anyway, that's why, because then Monsanto buys up all these seed companies, and what do they do immediately when they buy a seed company? They drop the heirloom varieties. Why? Because if you have an heirloom variety, then you can keep your own seeds. And they don't want that, so they drop it. This is Caleb's, speaking of that, this is Caleb's Winterfine Fettle Greens. I am one of 3 people in the United States who create open pollinated vegetable varieties, which is almost a completely, totally lost art. And this is a winter variety of a green that grows in Utah all winter long, in the winter with no covering. And it's fantastic. I developed it.
What's it called?
It's called Fine Fettle Greens. Because the most important thing to me was having something that you can grow in the winter in Utah that you don't have to. I have a geothermal greenhouse, and I have cold frames and hot beds, and I wrote a whole book about how to garden in the winter, but I wanted to develop a vegetable variety that was winter stable that you could pick and eat all winter long. So that's why you want that one. Golden sweet snow peas are the earliest prolific peas that you could grow in Utah. I have grown hundreds of varieties of peas. I have tested them over and over again. Golden sweet peas are the earliest, so if you want an early prolific harvest, then you grow golden sweet peas.
Is it too late to plant them still?
practice herbal medicine in our house, and this is Mormon tea, which is medicinal ephedra, which helps you with your colds, and you can grow that in a sandy, gravelly place where you don't have a sprinkling system. Lemon balm, the last class, yes?
I should say that green tea, I always thought, and it's always written that they will not grow here in this California, only in St. George or. I'm here.
Oh no, it grows right here, wild.
Yeah, I've had mine just come up right through the winter time.
Yes, Brigham's tea is perennial, and once you have it, you'll have it forever. Lemon balm you heard about last time is a good nervine for children, so you can make lemon balm tea and give it to your obnoxious children, or you could stop feeding them sugar, which also works. I don't believe in sugar. Speaking of not believing in sugar, one of the best things that you can do with lemon balm is put in some lemon balm leaves and some stevia leaves, and you can make lemonade with no lemons and no sugar. That's one of my favorite uses for lemon balm. Lemon balm is perennial. Once you have it, you'll have it the rest of your life. Medicinal hyssop is a medicinal herb that I wouldn't be without. It's the herb that you need for colds and respiratory illnesses and asthma. It has very powerful medicine. You just use the leaves and stems.
Are you selling these?
Oh, yes, of course I'm selling this. So that's also a perennial. So once you have hyssop, you'll have it the rest of your life.
Would you say hyssop?
Yeah.
Hyssop. This is St. John's wort. If you have sadness, then you can take St. John's wort. Don't take it in combination with a pharmaceutical drug. It might kill you. I'm not kidding about that.
Is that the perforatum?
Is it the Hypericum perforatum?
I don't remember. It's on seedrenaissance.com. If you have a fancy phone.
It's illegal in YouTube.
If you have a fancy phone, you can look it up. It's true medicinal, though. I don't remember off the top of my head what the...
It's not easy to get in Utah, so that's possible.
No. The medicinal, are you talking about the seeds or the plants?
St. John's wort.
Oh.
The seeds or the transplants you plant in your garden, they're illegal in Utah. They're on the noxious weed list.
So
It's really hard
So
to...
you sell Hypericum at the nursery, but it's not the perforatum medicinal.
Well, the same thing is true of lobelia, too. They have, and calendula. I can't live without calendula, and I'm sorry I don't have calendula seeds here today. But there are hundreds of different varieties of lobelia and calendula, but there is only one or two true medicinal varieties, and they're very difficult to come by. The seeds are very difficult to
You
come
have
by.
the medicinal.
That's good.
Oh, everything, yeah, I sell only true medicinal seeds. My seeds that are marked true medicinal, and you can go read about this on seedrenaissance.com. I don't mess around. What was I going to tell you about that? Something important. Anyway,
The varieties of
true medicinal resinous calendula seed, there's only one grower in the United States, and it has taken me a year of begging to get, because every time he would give me a little bit of seed, it would be sold out immediately. It took me a year of begging to get a quantity of seeds, which is why I didn't bring any here today, because they just sell as fast as I can get them, because they're true medicinal calendula. Having true medicinal lobelia is very hard to come by. You go yourself and try to find seeds for Mormon tea, I dare you. It's not easy to find these seeds.
Ratio Jack New Horizon Herb sells calendula officinalis.
Yes, they do. That's correct. Who said that?
That's what we want is the officinalis.
Yeah.
And what's the variety of lobelia?
Lobelia inflata.
Thank you.
Thank you. In flood. But, well, we don't have time to talk about that. We can talk about that individually if you'd like, but there are lots of lobelias that are not medicinal, that are inflata, that are not medicinal. Okay. Dark green zucchini is just your plain regular panting pepper zucchini that you all love and we have to have, and this is an early version. This is early crookneck squash because we have to have our yellow crookneck squash in the summer, and that's an early version. These are albino sugar beets that you can make sugar out of on the top of your stove, and if you don't like beets, then these are the beets that you should be growing. They're pure white beets, and they taste like sugar, and they're very nutritious. They're really good for you and very hard to find. Yes, yes. And they make, in the winter, they make wonderful salad greens as well. Yes, the tops are very good. This is snowberry tomatoes, which are the best tomatoes for winter harvesting in a greenhouse in Utah, and also a very good summer tomato too, fairly early. This is turkey red winter wheat. This is winter wheat. I have a huge patch of this growing at my house. I increase it every year. And you plant this in the fall, and it's ready to harvest in June. These are collard baits. These are one of the best self-seeding vegetables in my garden. Collard baits self-seed every year, so once you have them, you never have to buy them again.
Say that name again.
Collard baits are greens.
Collard baits?
Yeah, well, you can look at them when they're up here. Or you could go to seedrenaissance.com. They're on seedrenaissance.com. So once you have collard greens, then you don't have to worry about that. Again, those are good for winter eating and for summer eating and for steaming and sauteing. And I love them in stir-fry. And this is dwarf blue kale, which is self-seeding as well. So once you have this kale, then you will never have to buy seed again. We were just having a conversation about kale. I've grown lots of different kale varieties, but this is the only one I've been able to get to thrive and self-seed in Utah, because self-seeding is the goal. Early prolific straight neck squash, we had crook neck, now we have a straight neck. Everybody's heard of that. Soapwort is a plant that has been grown for thousands and thousands of years, and if you know where to find it, you can still find the original pioneer patches of soapwort in this valley, but I'm not going to tell you where they are. And this is what you use to make soap from your backyard garden. It's also a gorgeous flower. And this is Rampicante Italian vining zucchini. Rampicante is the only squash in the world that is both a summer squash and a winter squash. So, and one of the great things about this is that it has a long neck. All of the seeds are in a bulb in the bottom, but it's a regular zucchini through the summer. And then if you let it turn the color of a butternut, it completely changes texture and flavor, and then you can save it all winter and eat it as a winter squash. It's the only squash in the world that does that.
Down below. Which squash is that?
It's Rampicante Italian vining zucchini. Getting harder and harder to find the seed for that. Chioggia beets are the bullseye. They're red and white beets. They don't bleed everywhere. They have a very nice sweet taste. They're highly nutritious. And those are my other favorite beets. Waltham butternut squash, because everyone needs a butternut squash, because if you're not eating butternut in the winter, you can't be happy. Butter crunch lettuce is the best self-seeding lettuce that I've ever been able to find for Utah. Danvers carrots, if you insist on growing carrots in our horrible porcelain soil, instead of in compost in a raised bed, our two exceptions to our raised beds, by the way, are potatoes and carrots. We grow potatoes in straw, and our carrots have to go in a foot tall because we want a nice big carrot. So Danvers is a shorter, stubbier carrot. It still makes a lot of carrot to go around, but it grows better in the porcelain soil. Potimarron squash is a very old French variety of squash that has very thick flesh, and it's one of the two best baking squashes, and it stays and stays and stays in the winter. It's very hardy for storing over the winter, and I make enormous amounts of pumpkin bread and pumpkin cookies with stevia, pumpkin everything. I love pumpkin everything, so I grow potimarron. Sacrificial tai-sai is an organic natural herbicide. This is a variety of Asian green that you plant all over the garden to draw the aphids, because aphids like some things much better than they like other things. So if you're having problems with aphids on your brassicas, like your broccoli and your cauliflower and your collards, then what you want to do is plant sacrificial tai-sai scattered around the garden, and it draws the aphids to those plants, and they stay there and eat those plants and leave your other plants alone. Which I think is fairly ingenious, don't you? Rutabaga, do any of you grow or eat rutabaga? Rutabaga is a really nice root bulb plant which makes the best mashed potatoes, and it's way healthier for you than regular mashed potatoes. So what you do is you take equal parts rutabaga, carrots, and potatoes, and just boil them in the same pot and then mash them up with a little butter, salt, and pepper, and you'll be like, why haven't I been eating this my whole life? You'll be shocked. It's so delicious. And if you're trying to be self-reliant, which is what we're trying to be at our house, then you need to have as many root vegetables as you can, especially if you are not practiced at winter gardening yet. Mizuna Asian greens are the fastest growing winter vegetable you can grow in Utah. These are amazingly fast. You can plant these from seed, and in 30 days they'll be harvestable size in the middle of winter. You can plant these in December, you can plant them in January.